It's the only thing I can't fix right away. It's under 2 pounds, the body. It is the lightest little guy we've ever made. If you guys ever shot medium format still, it reminds me most of a medium format still camera. It's something that'll be a little heavy around the neck by the time it's built, but you can sit there all day. And it's the kind of camera that, you know, it's very easy to forget that you're talking to somebody that has a camera in their hand. Other things to know on the camera is we do have an SDI built into the camera. And we also have audio built into the camera. This is one of those things that as cameras have gotten smaller, most of them go deaf once they go below a certain size. Because to be fair, I mean, you tell us you want a small camera, I tell you I can only fit so many things in a small space. But we wanted to absolutely make sure that you had some kind of audio input that was professional on the FS5, because those little 3.5 mil jacks aren't necessarily the best, and they can pull out. As well as an SDI, because as much as we like HDMI, it's not a secure connection, especially if you might be on a rig. Let's say you're flying in a Movi where you might be up in the air. Vibration tends to shake out connectors that aren't married to the camera. We've got buku mounting points on the front of this guy. These are all 1/4-20 mounting points. They're into the skeleton of the camera itself. If you manage to shear one of these things off, you've broken a bone in terms of the camera's insides. And the actual body itself for the camera is not plastic, it's magnesium. So it's physically more robust. And the 2-pound goal for designing this camera is because of all these new rigs and jigs that have come out for cameras these days. We have been able to fly these, mount them in gimbals, stick them onto the side of cars, and take them underwater so far, and using a lot of pre-existing technology. So this is probably one of our most ergonomically sound cameras that we've ever had. This is a camera built out with the pistol grip on the side, with the handle and the viewfinder. It's not too much bigger. The whole thing with all of that built is about 6 pounds. Sir?
Did I miss you talking about time code? I know there's no in or out. Did you already talk about that?
We didn't get to that, but I will.
Next? All right.
I promise you. And remind me if I forget.
All right.
Don't let me off the hook. This is just a tour of the back of the camera. Here's the pistol grip on its own. It's just this little guy. It's got some control surface on it. And it can rotate all the way around just like the EX1 had. So the idea is that if I want to hold the camera like this, having my wrist turned the right way, hurts less, and allows me to do it for longer. The same with the low angle shot where I want my hand here as opposed to being stuck like that, which limits how low I can go. It takes a little getting used to, like having to turn it as you're going, and it becomes a pat your head, rub your tummy thing the first time when you're like, all right, well, I got to turn the hand grip, then I got to zoom the lens, and oh wait, where's talent? It takes a minute. I advise a couple rifle drills, go to a highway on a weekend with a case of beer and just shoot cars. But as you can see here, this is the difference with the grip. But for a little guy, it makes it pretty easy. You've got a lot of assignable buttons on here. You have your image zoom, and all of these are programmable. So if you don't want that button to do that thing, it's entirely up to you to change what that function is for these buttons. They just come pre-assigned because we had to put something on there. Other thing we got up at the top of the camera, you're going to be seeing this on like all Sony cameras coming out of the factory from like here on until we consider it a bad idea. Right now we think it's a good idea. And this is this thing called the MI shoe, the multi-interface shoe, which means that when you're upgrading your camera, let's say you want to upgrade your audio at the same time. Well, we at Sony used to be very well known for making audio equipment. We have not stopped. We've actually just kind of reinvigorated our audio line at the top end and the medium end. And we have this audio system called UWPD.
It's awesome.
And it's competitive price-wise with every of the other ones, the Shores, the Sennheisers. We did this on purpose. And what we said was, well, we have an in-house advantage. We make cameras, we make lavs. Why don't we create a way so that you never have to put batteries in your wireless receiver, and you don't have to hook up a cable? That's what we've done with this multi-interface shoe. So if you have a Sony audio wireless system, you can, when you dock it to the camera, it'll actually then take all the information out of the Sony wireless system and the audio, and you won't have to power it. Now, of course, that'll hit your battery a little bit more, but that means you can always have AA's, and the cable comes with the unit. So you always have two ways to power your batteries for audio. So let's say the other way goes, you're using the audio separately, you run out of AA's, now you at least have the camera's battery as a lifeboat for your audio. Other cool things about those units is that they auto set up. You just literally have to hold them on and find each other mode, and they'll channel assign to whatever's clear. And it's nice in the sense that the receiver has two headphone jacks on our audio wireless system. And the question is, well, why do you need two headphone jacks? Well, if you've ever been in a scenario where you're listening to audio and recording, you hear a hum. That's like one of the worst things, like right before you're gonna roll, which is like, you hear a hum or a little pop or a crackle going in there. Well, in most wireless audio transmitters and receivers, you can't tell where that sound is coming from. Is it coming from the mic? Is it coming from the receiver? Is it coming from the camera? Well, now with that second audio jack, what you're able to do is plug directly into the receiver and go, is it in the receiver? No, it's not in the receiver. Great, it must be some other place in the audio path. It gives you one more option to figure out. You can listen to things at different places. So you can tell, oh, this is how it sounds coming into the receiver. Now I'm going to plug into the camera. Do those two sound the same? Well, it's not the camera and it's not the receiver. Now I got to go look at the transmitter and the mic. Other fun thing just to know about our digital wireless system is that one of our receivers can talk to as many transmitters as you want to get.
Yeah.
So this is cool. So imagine like you're on a set now and you want a director's headphone. So you have your audio guy, you got your talent mic'd up, and you just ask the audio guy, I just want another receiver. That's all. Just give me another receiver. I just want to hear talent. Give me the mixed feed of talent. You can have that just on your belt and just have it as your director's headset, which is a really nice feature because you can plug directly into it. Third option that's cool that I figured out with the Sony audio wireless system is that most of these little wireless audio guys will only receive what's called mic level audio. And you've seen like mic and line. It's usually that little switch on the side of the camera when you're trying to figure out what switch to get your audio to work. Difference between mic and line is literally how much power is coming down the cable and how your audio is kind of sent. Is it sent paired and balanced or unbalanced? When our audio receivers and transmitters can do both, mic and line, where is this useful in the real world? Here's where I found it to be useful. Most of the times if you're trying to do an event, there's usually a guy with the soundboard or a girl with the soundboard. And most of the times, unless they have a mic output available for you, you can't hook up your wireless system to that because you might blow it up. This audio unit can receive both. So that means you can plug right into the line out of any switcher. You won't have to worry about it hurting any of the equipment, and you can take the switcher feed of audio for an event as opposed to bring maybe more. You can take advantage of house sound now confidently as opposed to in the past where you'd have to go, well, unless your switcher has a mic output, I can't take your line. Or do you have something that can switch from line to mic? Because you don't have to have that conversation with the audio guy. You just say, do you have a mic or line available? I'll take that output. I can push it into my system. Now, there's other thing I mentioned, this variable ND. This is cool, and it's not been in many cameras. This is always used to be a specialty feature you had to buy someplace else and literally throw in front of the camera. Here's how it works, which is that we have two filters. And actually, when you turn this on, if you listen really close, you can hear the actual motor moving these filters in place. So we have two filters that stack like this. And they're both linear polarizers. What a polarizer does is it looks clear to your eye, but really, really small. If you were a ray of light, normally we know that rays of light travel on a straight path. They just get to where they're trying to go the shortest distance. But when you put light through a polarizing filter, what it does is it actually makes that light corkscrew as it goes through the filter, and it changes what's called the phase of the light. So this is kind of getting into like that Einstein, I'm going to ride a ray of light place of thought, which is that if you imagine sitting on a ray of light and you're riding along, you're sitting straight up like if you were riding a horse. Your legs are over the side of the ray of light and you're going straight. When you hit a polarizer, depending on how it's polarized, next thing you know, when you come out that ray of light, you're sitting with your head at 3 o'clock. You're no longer sitting up straight on the horse. And that's because that polarizer actually changes the direction of the ray of light coming through that filter. You have a polarizer built into the rear view mirror of all of your cars. You ever have it when somebody's got their brights nailing you from behind and you flip that little switch on the bottom of your rear view mirror and you realize that the mirror is no longer looking through the back, really, but all the lights get darker all of a sudden in your rear view mirror. The reason for that is that in that mirror, there's a polarizing layer that when you change the angle of that mirror, the light gets bounced back to you at a different angle. And when you change the angle of light, you can lower or raise the intensity, the brightness of what you're looking at reflected. Little side note, the reason Polaroid exists as a company, did at least exist as a company, was originally, way back in the day, the founder, and we're talking like 1930s here, one of the leading causes of death in early cars, we're talking like Ford Model Ts at this point, was being blinded at night because there was absolutely no specification for how bright your headlights can be. So it was sort of like a competing, like, I can see in the dark, but somebody would have torches on the front of their car and somebody else would have a candle. And the problem was you're driving at night on roads in the United States, streetlights don't exist yet. You'd go around a curve with somebody, you'd get blinded, and you'd go off the road. So it's Edwin Land, yes, thank you. The founder of Polaroid said, well, if I put a polarizing filter on the headlights of all the cars, and I put a polarizing filter in your windshield, the light will still light the road, but when it comes through the windshield, it won't blind you. And it took him like 20 years to fight and lobby the car industry to create a governing body of standards, which became Highway Road and Safety, that allowed us to have this benefit. And that's built into all your cars today. There is a thin little strip of plastic in between your windshields that is accounting for another little film of plastic in the headlights of all the other cars on the road that lowers their intensity when it comes through to you. That is what a polarizer does. So in the camera here, I have what's called a variable polarizer, which means I have two filters. One turns the light to 3 o'clock, one turns the light to 9 o'clock. And when I put them in front, I'm going to start turning them like this against each other. And what that allows me to do is, as we know in the past, when you used to flip your ND in, it'd be 3, 6, 9. It'd be a big hit of light, a bigger hit of light, and we're shooting in the dark now. What this allows me to do is I can change ND in tenths of a stop now. All right, I can really feather it in. Instead of a big chunk, and a big chunk, now I can go incremental little ways through how dark or how bright I need it to be. All right, as we keep moving. Now, if you guys are familiar with the FS7, this is not the FS7's menu. This is the menu of the FS700. The FS700 traditionally was for folks that were stepping into the higher ends of video. You're getting your ankles and your knees wet. So it's a simplified menu system. We're trying not to throw a terrible amount of video jargon at you guys. There's, of course, always a little learning curve to figure out what exactly Sony calls stuff. But it's just meant to be pretty straightforward in terms of that. Like, if you go into the FS7, there are some engineering terms in there that, like, if you don't have a guy like me, or you're willing to like spend a lot of time online or reading through, or have like at least your phone out as you're going through the menu going, what is that again? This should be a little bit easier to deal with. Just so you guys know, the lens mounts on the FS5 and the FS7 are the same. They're Sony's E-mount lensing system. And we have a huge family of lenses to play with. And of course, if you have adapters, insert adapter, and we can basically put any other lens you guys have a dream for on the camera. And you're as good as your adapter. It's the same thing like the filters. If you buy a $100 adapter, it might not have the best performance. You can spend up to $1,000. So you gotta play that range, knowing like what I'm trying to achieve, what's the reality of the budget. The FS5 has built-in Wi-Fi. So there's a caveat here though. Any E-mount lens, the things that go natively, have no middleman jumping in there and translating. It's not an app, it's literally a browser base. If you have a tablet, a phone, or a laptop that has a web browser, can see a Wi-Fi network, and you can put an IP address in, we can control the camera. I can zoom the lens, I can do the iris. It's not, like having your hand on the lens. Some live shots you can get away with, some you can't. It's not a RoboCam, I wouldn't say that. But you do actually have the ability to remotely drive the lens via your phone, a tablet, or a laptop with the slider, provided it's E-mount. Some other lenses can allow for some of that capability, but like on Canons, it's hit or miss, because they were never designed to do that, and we're kind of sneaking and like hacking their protocol to make that happen. And that's why it doesn't always work smoothly. And if they change, certain lenses have different languages in them or different levels of languages which affect that kind of feature.
No hardwired RCP type?
Not on this guy. There is no, like what he's talking about, just so you guys know, RCP is a remote control paint unit, which means in our big studio cameras, there would be like a little box with tons of knobs and buttons on it that I would just plug into the camera, and I'd be back in a truck and I could shade black or white, affect the iris of the camera, the whole nine. Traditionally something for studio cameras. We don't have that on this system only because where it sits kind of in the family in terms of how professional it's thinking of being, and literally real estate. Part of that would have fought the under 2 pound side of what we were trying to go for, so it becomes a trade-off. The FS7 doesn't have it built into the camera either.
No, and even with the back, you don't have that option.
This when you're looking at the back with the tall Sony battery here, like the only cameras we have that right now are the F5 and 55, and that's because we consider them broadcast level, and I agree that might be a bit of a it's our own line in the sand for such things. But the other side of it is, if you were to buy, we have two things. RMB is the lower cost version of the RCP. It just does less.
Same connector.
Same connector, but it just does less. But each of those are like $1,100, $1,200. So like the chances of folks like jumping, popping for something that's gonna be like a third, like an eighth or a quarter of the cost of the camera, when the business math came out, that didn't make a ton of sense for it. I would expect what we've been asking for, because you're not the only person to ask for that, is to get more control via the Wi-Fi. So that we're looking to evolve that in firmware, if we can. That has to be looked at an engineering level before it's blessed and okayed for business and distribution. But we're looking at that level of control. Just building on what we talked about with the clear image zoom, 2K center scan is literally, instead of being able to zoom to that 2-point magnification, this is just click. I just want to go to 2 times. This is a doubler, like if you had a doubler on any other lens or camera. And this is because from the 5 and the 55, we had some folks say, well, I'm not shooting a 35mm project. I want to shoot Super 16, or I have Super 16 lenses, or I have a 2/3 inch ENG lens that is good and I want to use it for this project. I have a lot of guys in North Carolina who shoot for the Atlantic Coast Sports Conference, who shoot basketball on F5s. And you can't shoot that with the 35mm zoom. That's a horrible, cruel thing to do to an operator, because the focus is really shallow, and they can't reach all the way across a court. You can't reach the backboard if you're sitting under one. So what they did was, we have this 2K image zoom, which literally just says, show me exactly what an HD camera would see. No more. That's it. Punch me in. And that means that when you put a 2/3 inch piece of glass on there, that lens is normal. If you had a 14 by ENG zoom lens that came off your old beta cam and you threw it on there, it'll work. It'll look normal. There won't be any magnification. It's not a 15. You haven't changed the lens at all. It will be normalized. The only thing you got to figure out in this is how to power that lens. That's the only thing that the camera won't provide for you when you go to like an ENG lens. Remember, we always had that little 12-pin lens plug on the side of the camera. Well, this little guy doesn't have that. So that means you probably end up having to talk to Josh. We get you a little box that takes power out of the back of the camera, and you can then hook up and power your lens that way. The only other thing you got to be prepared for when you use these hybrid options is that there's no data. going back and forth, only power. So like when you want to figure out what f-stop you're at, you got to look at the lens. It's not going to show up in the viewfinder because they're not traveling over that road. You know, data's coming down a different place. These cameras, and this is true of a 55, a 5, an FS7, and an FS5, is that its brain, kind of like juggling, like each of these cameras can juggle about 4 balls at a time. But if, let's say, you ask one of these cameras to do like 60p 4K, that's asking it to think a lot. That's when it's only going to be able to juggle like 2 balls at once. So the more resolution you ask for, and the higher frame rates you ask for, the amount of other features you have access to tend to get more limited because the camera's using all its horsepower to just do those things. That makes sense? So it's like you have this budget of like, well, if I'm doing 4K 60 in any of my cameras, I know that's when I have the least access to stuff. And if I'm shooting HD, I've got the most access to stuff. And it's just about how much I'm asking that camera to think about at a given time. The other thing we've got in here in the camera is because we have these log modes, S-log, we don't have what are traditionally called LUTs, lookup monitoring LUTs, which is like a filter effect to go like, well, I'm shooting log, and it tends to look at like this gray washed out stuff. And the reason log looks gray and washed out is because traditionally, if you look at this, like my laptop, that monitor, this projector, agree with me or argue with me, when I say this monitor and I'm going to put video on this projector, I have a range that I can fit my video in. 0 is black and 100% is maximum white, right? We're all in agreement so far. If you were to try and measure the camera the same way you qualify that screen, which says, well, I have the 0 to 100 range to fit all my video, how much information does this camera make? Well, it makes, if you're shooting S-log, you make 1,300% video. So that means you've got 1,300% worth of information you're trying to fit into a 100% space. That's a very hard thing to do. So when you're dealing with log and you've got this huge signal, when you put it on a monitor, which has got a limited ability to show you everything, when you put that in there, you're looking at the very middle of your video signal. Well, what's the very middle of your dynamic range? That's gray. You're staring at middle gray. So that means when you look at log and it's gray here, that means what real white is outside of that monitor's ability to show you, and black is outside of that ability to show you. What monitor LUTs and in higher end cameras do is they try and imitate what 709 might look like. It's like in Photoshop when you just throw a filter over a picture and you say, well, what would it look like with this effect? What would it look like without this effect? And it's a non-destructive way. You're not burning it into your video to approximate a given look. In this camera, we don't have MLUTs because when you say LUT, L-U-T, that's an actual real world thing that if you don't build that right, it's not a LUT. We have what's called gamma display assist, which says, take that gray washed out stuff and approximate what HD would look like in terms of contrast and color. So I have an idea of what's going on because you have to figure out how to expose this stuff, which can be challenging because this is like where all these cameras, even a little FS5 now, we're getting back to where we were with film. You're shooting more information than you're ever going to use at the end of the day, so which means it's kind of hard to see it all at once. Like, this is not different from when we shot film, which brought back 20 stops of dynamic range. But whenever you went to the theater, you only see about 10 or 12 because all that gets managed down at a certain point. That's just part of the workflow of image making at the high end. All right, and other features that just come into this guy are super slow motion. This is the same stuff that was in there from the FS700. Okay? We can if you want to stay at HD resolution, I can give you up to 240 frames per second. And how that's driven is buffer based. So when you go into the camera and say, hey, I want to do 240 frames per second, that means you have an 8-second buffer. You got 8 seconds to burn 240 frames per second. So you set it up, you say, I want to shoot a balloon popping. Well, let's say you're going to make it hard on yourself and you don't get to tell somebody when to pop the balloon. You only get to react to it. We have different modes in the camera which let you set the record button. So there's one mode that's called end trigger. What end trigger does is that you say, all right, well, Josh is going to pop the balloon and I just try to try and get him. When I use end trigger, he pops the balloon and I hit the record button, and what the camera does, instead of rolling from when I hit the record button forward, it goes backwards. It says, I want the previous 8 seconds from when you hit the record button. And that feature came out of News and Nature documentary because you could never know when the bird was going to jump off the damn branch. So we had the ability so that the camera has a brain like RAM, and it's just filling up its RAM every 8 seconds going, did you need that? All right, no, I'm dumping this 8 seconds, I'm going to roll 8 more. And that's how the buffer system works in the camera. If you wanted a 16-second buffer, you shoot at 120 frames per second. If you go up to 480, it drops a little bit. And if you go to 960, you have like a 2-second buffer. And I would tell you that at 960 and 480, we are stealing resolution from you. It's the only way we can manage that much data. If not, poor little thing would start smoking. The 960 stuff is relatively arty looking. It's pretty busy. The only times I've seen it really be solid is its best lighting source is the sun. You're outside, because all of these, the higher up you go in frame rate, it's going to cost you light. So, remember, that's why high speed here is saying, look, you can see the flicker on the side of my face. As you go higher and higher, the camera gets more light hungry, and you'll be able to start seeing things like flicker, because each of these lights is actually flickering once every 60th of a second. If you get outside of that 60th of a second, you'll actually see the pulsing of the light. Have you guys ever seen these super slow-mo Nike commercials where the light's just coming up and down, big one? That's not on purpose. That's because when you shoot really high speed, lights pulse, and you can fight that and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars renting or buying what are called high-speed lights that literally throw their light faster and have a shorter interval of flicker, or you call it a look. And you live with it, and if you're Nike, you get to standardize it.
There's actually a pretty cool option in the FS7 camera that once in a while, if we have a monitor or a light that's giving us a little bit too much flicker, it's called ECS mode, and you basically can change your shutter based on, I believe, hertz or frequency. So you can change your shutter to completely go off of what the frequency of the light is. So you can go to 42.7 frequency and reduce that shutter completely. And it doesn't really affect motion as much if you're just doing an interview or anything along those lines, which is pretty cool.
What you tend to find is somebody's going to ask you to come shoot them at their business or whatever, and they've got old fluorescents, and all of a sudden you just go, oh crap.
That's where you see
everything's pulsing. Not only is it green, but it's it's an epileptic green. And this ECS mode, I'll tell you where it came from. Remember, everybody's here. Yeah, we're all about the right age. Ever used to shoot old glass monitors and you see that bar rolling through? ECS was originally created so that you could control where that bar went and make it go away. These days, it just means that when you see a light flickering, or let's say you see different lights flickering at different intervals in a room, that means one light is probably at 59 hertz, the other light's at 60 hertz, that light's at 57 hertz. So when you use this ECS mode, or the shutter in general, you can try and find that number right in between everybody where the flicker's hidden. The other thing is this, in each of these, in the FS7, you can do up to 180 frames per second in XAVC-I. 180 is nice and fast, but all lights in the United States are made to be 60 hertz, so 60 cycles a second. So as much as I love going to a 180, I almost always end up shooting at 120 because it's a multiple of 60, which means I'm hidden in that valley of the light. So that's why 120 and 240 are safer numbers when shooting under 60 hertz lights, because you're going to try and hide in the multiple of the dip of the flicker. Again, this is something you'll play with. You'll feel this out as opposed to think this out, and it'll be different for whatever lighting environment you're in.
So because of our limit on time, I want you guys to get a chance to kind of check out the cameras, check out the gear. Julian's going to be there with the footage if you want to go over it, check it out on the projector, have it played back, have it explained. But for the most part, you guys can get up, check out the cameras, ask questions, et cetera, everything along those lines, because they only got about 20 minutes, and I don't want to burn all that time with you guys not getting a chance to have hands-on time with the camera itself. So you guys are more than welcome to step up, check out the camera.
I first wanted to give feedback as far as like these events at the